What is up, everybody? Welcome to the channel. My name is Josh. I'm the fantasy football buff, and today I'm going to be answering the age-old question that everybody seems to be asking. Is Calvin Ridley this year's Chris Godwin? I'm going to break down all of that in this video. So without further ado, let's get it. Before I start this video, my goal is to hit 100 subscribers by the time the NFL season starts. So if you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. The more subscribers I get, the more YouTube videos I can make. So make sure you do not miss any future content and subscribe to the channel. Appreciate you. As we all know, Chris Godwin was an amazing fantasy football wide receiver last season. He was second overall and only played 14 games. And now he's being drafted as a top 5 dynasty wide receiver. But this wasn't completely out of the blue. A lot of people saw this coming for a number of reasons. I'm going to break down those 5 reasons in this video. Indicator numero uno that Godwin was going to be a beast in fantasy football in 2019 was the fact that he plays on an incredibly pass-heavy offense. The Tampa Bay Buccaneers in 2018 were the 4th pass-heaviest team in the league with 625 pass attempts. And this ties directly into reason number 2, which is vacated targets. In the 2019 offseason, the Buccaneers lost Deshaun Jackson and Adam Humphries. They were 3rd in the league in vacated targets in that offseason with 14.9 a game. Someone had to assume those targets that were left there. Reason number 3 is the fact that he is the wide receiver 2 on his team, right? Godwin is an amazing talent, but defenses have to worry about Mike Evans and put their top tier cornerbacks against him, which will open up routes and open up space for Godwin in that offense. And reason number 4 was future flashes. Deshaun Jackson got injured in week 12 of the 2018 season. Now, weeks 1 through 11, with Jackson on the field, Godwin averaged only 55% of snaps, so he wasn't really getting that much playtime. Once Jackson was off the field, in the last 6 weeks of the season, Godwin averaged 79.5% of snaps in that offense. Now, this did not necessarily translate to fantasy football success, but that offense was so explosive and there was just so much volume on that field that it was only a matter of time before Godwin blew up. Reason number 5 is Chris Godwin's ADP. If he was being drafted in the 2nd and 3rd round in leagues last season, nobody would have wanted to touch him because he does have risk, right? He hadn't broken out yet. But he was being drafted in the middle of the 4th round as the wide receiver 15, which for a breakout player who has potential to be a top 5 upside, I think that is the perfect balance of risk and reward. Before I break down the potential that Calvin Ridley has, it is important to note that Chris Godwin and Calvin Ridley are very similar players in the sense of their body type. Right, Calvin Ridley and Chris Godwin are both 6'1" exactly. They both have 9 1/8 inch hand size, and they both ran exactly a 4.43 in the combine. So they're both fast, they both have similar size. Godwin's a little bit heavier, but physically, they're very comparable. Now let's see if the 5 reasons for Godwin's breakout that I gave apply to Calvin Ridley. Reason number 1, does Calvin Ridley play on a pass-heavy offense? Well, last season, the Falcons led the league in pass attempts with 684. They passed to the wide receiver 416 times. That's more than any other team in the entirety of the league. They have had a bottom 10 defensive unit in points given up per game over the past 2 years. I'm expecting this offense to be incredibly pass-heavy, especially under their offensive coordinator, Dirk Cutter. This offense is going to be at least top 5 in pass attempts in 2020. Reason number 2 is vacated targets. Over this past offseason, the Falcons lost Mohamed Sanu, Austin Hooper, and Devontae Freeman. The Falcons were number 1 in the league in vacated targets with 39% of them. That's 258 targets that are up for grabs. That is an average of 16 per game. Ridley only saw 93 targets last season. And even with the additions of Gurley and the addition of Hurst, I think there is plenty of volume in this offense for everybody to eat. Reason number 3, is Calvin Ridley viewed as the 2nd wide receiver on his team? Absolutely. Right, Julio may be getting older, but he is still one of the best wide receivers in the NFL. And as shown, Julio does not need to get hurt for really to be a wide receiver one. Julio will distract top tier corners every game they play. And it's so difficult for defenses to scheme against teams that have two elite wide receivers like they do in Atlanta. And as mentioned before, this offense passes so much. I think we could see a 1A, 1B situation just like we saw in Tampa Bay last season. Fourth reason for Calvin Ridley is his flashes of the future last season. Ridley had a slow start to the 2019 season. As you can see here in his game log, weeks 1 through 10, Ridley was the wide receiver 30 in fantasy football. Then Mohamed Sanu gets traded to the Patriots, and Austin Hooper is in and out of the lineup due to injury. During this period, weeks 11 through 14, Calvin Ridley was the second best wide receiver in all of fantasy football. He averaged 21.5 fantasy points per game during that stretch. What was the biggest change that caused this explosion? It was targets, right? In weeks 1 through 10, Ridley averaged only 6 targets a game. In weeks 11 through 14, Ridley averaged 9.25 targets a game. That is a pace for 148 targets on the season, and that's not what I'm predicting, right? But what really showed us is that when he got that type of volume, he was able to produce as an elite fantasy wide receiver. And I don't believe that this was just a flash in the pan. I believe that Ridley will land somewhere between 110 to 120 targets next season, and this is with Julio Jones healthy. If he sees that volume, he can easily be a wide receiver one next season. And the fifth comparison that Calvin Ridley has to Chris Godwin is his ADP. Right, he is currently being taken in the middle of the 4th round as the wide receiver 17. And considering the upside we saw last season and the amount of targets I'm projecting him to see next season, I think that is the perfect balance of risk and rewards. A couple of quick hot facts for you guys that you all need to be aware of when drafting Calvin Ridley. Last season, Chris Godwin scored a touchdown on 7% of his targets. Over the past 2 years, Ridley has scored a touchdown on 9% of his targets. Calvin Ridley is incredibly efficient as a wide receiver. Ridley only saw 14% of the Falcons' red zone targets last season, but Austin Hooper saw 21%. Right, so even if Ridley jumps up a little bit to 17, 18% of the target share in the red zone, he is going to go off. He's an efficient wide receiver. Last season, his average yard per target was 9.3 yards. That's 21st in the league. We have to come to the realization that Calvin Ridley is just a damn good wide receiver. Still not convinced on Calvin Ridley? I'm going to throw a couple hype pieces your way to make sure that train keeps rolling. Terrell Owens came onto the Fantasy Pros podcast in early March, and they asked T.O. about his thoughts on Jerry Jeudy before the NFL draft. Owen goes out of his way to mention that he once ran routes with Jerry Jeudy and Calvin Ridley at Alabama the year before Ridley got drafted. T.O. said that he knew from that moment that Calvin Ridley was the real deal. And I respect his opinion way more than I respect anyone's opinion on Twitter or any fantasy analyst, right? T.O. knows what it takes to be a great NFL wide receiver, and he sees that potential in Calvin Ridley. But it's important to point out that T.O. isn't the only person talking about Calvin Ridley next season. Matt Ryan said in an interview that he believes that Ridley is going to blow up this year. Here's Matt Ryan's quote. He says, "Ridley is in phenomenal shape. He's been running great, and I think his grasp of the offense and mastery of our system is so much further along than it was last year." Yes, these are all hype pieces. Yes, this has nothing to do with stats. But it is so important to talk about how many people are excited about Calvin Ridley's 2020 season and his future in the NFL. Before I start my final analysis, guys, join the movement. Subscribe to the channel if you're new. Help me to get to 100 subscribers before the start of the NFL season. It's not going to be something you are going to want to miss. All right, Calvin Ridley is currently being drafted as the wide receiver 17 in the 4th round. That's one spot behind A.J. Brown. Now, this might be a little bit of a hot take, but I would personally take Calvin Ridley over A.J. Brown. I think they both have very similar upside. We saw both of them blow up at the end of last season, but I believe Ridley is a safer pick. I think the wide receiver 24, so a low-end wide receiver 2, is Ridley's absolute floor because of the amount of targets that he is projected to see in this pass-heavy offense, and I can't say the same for A.J. Brown. In Dynasty Leagues, Ridley is a must-buy right now, in my opinion. I think Ridley is at his only and last chance to buy for him before he takes off. I'm predicting Ridley to be a top 10 wide receiver while Julio is still on the field. And if Julio gets hurt or retires after this season, there is no way that Ridley is not treated as a top 10 dynasty asset moving forward. Now is the last time you can get him at a discount before he blows up and becomes a top tier option. And if you can pay anything less than that, that's something I'm willing to do. All right, guys, that's all from me. Let me know in the comments below if you believe that Calvin Ridley is this year's Chris Godwin. Also, let me know who you'd rather have at their 4th round ADP, A.J. Brown or Calvin Ridley. Guys, if you've enjoyed my fantasy football content so far, please hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, help me get to 100 before the start of the NFL season, and go follow me on Instagram at fantasy.football.buff. I'm also going to put up a link to one of my favorite videos that I've ever made about how Saquon Barkley could be a bust in the 2020 season. Go check that out. Let me know what you think. I appreciate you all, and we'll see you next time. Peace.